I rise in support of H.R. 8454, the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act, legislation that would expand comprehensive cannabis research. In March, the Senate passed S-253, the Cannabidiol and Marijuana Research Expansion Act. In April, the House considered and passed H.R. 5657, the Medical Marijuana Research Act, which also passed with strong bipartisan support last Congress. The bill before us today, H.R. 8454, represents a bipartisan bicameral agreement that resolved the differences between both bills and brings us to a historic overdue moment for Congress. The consumption of marijuana and marijuana-derived CBD for medical use is approved and regulated in 37 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. This translates to tens of millions of Americans consuming marijuana every year. Yet we still do not have a comprehensive body of research on the safety or therapeutic effects or benefits of marijuana products. Because of its status as a Schedule I substance, research on marijuana has been regulated in a restrictive, time-consuming way, and the existing research is not representative of the products that are currently available to many Americans. H.R. 8454 streamlines the registration process for conducting research on marijuana and manufacturing marijuana products for research purposes and drug development. The bill maintains the appropriate oversight and control by the Department of Health and Human Services and the Drug Enforcement Administration and requires both applicants and regulators to adhere to clear protocols and timelines. The bill requires HHS and DEA to respond to registration applicants in a timely manner and requires a regular assessment to confirm an adequate supply of marijuana, including specific strains for medical research. And this ensures that the marijuana being provided for medical research appropriately reflects the strains and THC content in millions of products across the country. Mr. Speaker, this bill also clarifies that doctors can discuss with patients the potential harms and benefits of marijuana as a medical treatment. And finally, H.R. 8454 requires HHS to submit a report to Congress on the potential therapeutic effects of marijuana and CBD for serious medical conditions, effects on the developing human brain and body, and existing barriers to research. And I want to thank Representatives Blumenauer, Harris, Holmes, Norton, Dingell, Cohen, Griffith, Lee, and Case for their leadership on this issue, and I urge my colleagues to support the bill and look forward to the Senate acting expeditiously on our agreement to expand comprehensive cannabis research while protecting public health and safety. And I reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from New Jersey reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in favor of H.R. 8454, the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act. This bill is a revised version of H.R. 5657, Medical Marijuana Research Act, which was led by Representatives Harris and Blumenauer and overwhelmingly passed the House in April. The text of H.R. 8454 that we are considering today is largely similar to H.R. 5657, but it is consensus language that was agreed to through bipartisan negotiations with the Senate. I'm pleased we were able to get the language to a good place. Marijuana is a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Substance Act. Research on these substances must be conducted in accordance with the Controlled Substances Act and requires a Drug Enforcement Administration approved research protocol. If a researcher desires to make changes to an approved project, the researcher must submit a request to do so, which is then reviewed and must be approved by both the DEA and the FDA. In addition to the extensive regulatory hurdles that researchers face, the actual supply of research-grade marijuana is relatively limited. The supply is subject to the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs, which imposes certain obligations related to governmental oversight of its cultivation. While the DEA and the National Institute on Drug Abuse have taken some steps to increase the number of domestic manufacturers of research-grade marijuana, more could be done in this space. The Medical Marijuana Research Expansion Act improves the federal research landscape by streamlining both the research and manufacturing registration processes. This is critical to better understand the potential benefits and possible risk associated with marijuana use, as researchers must be able to study actual products that are currently used by consumers for both medical and recreational use. This data are long overdue, as policy decisions have far outpaced the science. States that have fully legalized marijuana have done so in a relative information vacuum with less understanding of what it is and what it does than virtually any nutritional supplement currently on the market, and with far less information than they have on legal substances that are easily abused, such as alcohol or tobacco. Until we make it easier to conduct the research, making fully informed policy decisions will remain challenging. Even rescheduling the substance administratively will necessitate robust data on potential medical use. Recent evaluations conducted separately by the FDA and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine have both illustrated the challenges of meeting the required standard of evidence for demonstrating effective medical use. Both studies concluded that lack of research was a significant factor in denying rescheduling petitions in the past. If Congress does not act, we will continue to have limited ability to study these products in clinical trial settings. This is a common sense solution. It will better our understanding of marijuana through legal, federally sanctioned, and scientifically valid research on this substance. I'd like to thank Representatives Blumenauer, Harris, and Chairman Pallone for working together on this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Georgia reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, is recognized.
I have no additional speakers, so I'll reserve.
So the gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, I'd like to yield such time as he shall consume to one of the leaders on this important subject, the doctor from Maryland, Representative Andy Harris.
The gentleman from Maryland, Dr. Harris, is recognized. For how much time was that, sir?
For as much time as he shall consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding the time. You know, the chairman of the committee got it right. This is historic, it's overdue, it's bipartisan, and it's bicameral, as it should be. So today I rise in support of H.R. 8454, the Medical Marijuana and Cannabidiol Research Expansion Act. You know, Representative Blumenauer and I have jointly co-sponsored this bill for 4 Congresses. Talk about overdue. Although we disagree about recreational marijuana, he supports it, I oppose it, we both concur that in regards to medical marijuana, we need to do the rigorous research to answer the questions. As a physician, I realize that if we're going to have marijuana legal in over 36 states for medical uses, we really ought to be able to do the research on it to see what it can and can't be used for. Because many claims that are made about it, some are legitimate, some will be found to be illegitimate. But the American public deserves to know whether medical marijuana and cannabidiol work for those claims that are being made. This bill makes it easier to do the necessary rigorous medical research, just like is done for any other drug that has a claim of efficacy in this country. The American public deserves to know what medical marijuana is useful for, because for anyone with those conditions where it is found to be useful, it could be a godsend. But for other conditions where the claims won't be found to be valid with rigorous research, it would be found to be ineffective, and that would help protect American patients as well. This would modernize our research methods, bringing medical marijuana up to the scientific standards we use for every other type of medication that is sold as a drug in this country. I urge support and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland yields back. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, Mr. Speaker, at this time, I yield such time as he shall consume to the gentleman from Virginia, Representative Griffith.
I thank my friend and majority leader, and leader of the committee, Frank Pallone. H.R. 8454 is an important bill. And it's interesting to hear the conversation here on the floor. I heard Mr. Carter say talking about the history that you couldn't get marijuana rescheduled because they didn't have enough research. And you can't get the research because it's scheduled as a Schedule I drug. So we've been trapped in this vortex where we can't get the information. I, too, am against recreational marijuana, but for medical marijuana. I think it has a great benefit. But for years, we've been in this trap where you couldn't do the sufficient research, therefore you couldn't reschedule it. This is crazy. And we're going to fix it here today. My belief is that medical marijuana can be beneficial when used in a proper setting. Despite the increasing use of cannabis products around the country, there have been very few legitimate peer-reviewed studies to determine the effect of the cannabis on the body. We don't know. We know it does some good anecdotally for patients with juvenile seizures. What we don't know is how much THC has to be in the cannabidiol to make it effective. This is what we need research for. This bill allows us to obtain approval to conduct cannabis research and obtain quality product, not just one strain out of Mississippi, but multiple products, quality products, monitored by the government to make sure it's not being misused, to be used in this research. It encourages research by improving and streamlining the registration process for marijuana. It also ensures the availability of verified cannabis products necessary for legitimate research by allowing approved institutions of higher education, practitioners, and manufacturers to manufacture and distribute marijuana for the purpose of conducting research. As someone who's advocated for this legislation for years, I appreciate the work that has been done to get us here today. Whatever position you may have on marijuana use, you need to know that this bill will allow us to come together, support more scientific research so that we can make informed decisions as we move forward as legislators. Now, I have to tell you, being here live as a legislator is also important because the genesis of this bill were several conversations that took place on the floor of this House when people who disagreed on the underlying issue would argue about what does the research show. And it finally became clear to Blumenauer, to Harris, to myself, and to others, we had to have more research in order to get the right answers for the American people. So I urge everyone to support H.R. 8454, and I yield back to
the gentleman from Virginia yields back. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I have no other speakers. At this time, I would encourage my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I think this is a great way of dealing with this issue overall and getting the Senate on board. And so I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The